The day my father closed the front door behind me, I was 7 months pregnant, carrying nothing but a small backpack and the future he refused to believe in. "You made your choice," he said, without looking me in the eyes. "Now live with the consequences." I stood on the porch in the pouring rain, just hoping, that he would open the door again. He never did. I remember placing my trembling hand on my stomach, feeling my baby kick for the first time that day. It was almost as if my daughter was reminding me that I wasn't completely alone, but I felt completely abandoned. My name is Emma, and if someone had told me that the same father who left me homeless would one day stand at my front door begging for my help, I would have laughed through my tears. Back then I had nothing. No home, no family, no savings, no one to call. The baby's father had disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant. My mother had passed away years earlier, leaving my father as the only parent I had left. And now, he had turned his back on me too. As I walked away from the only house I'd ever known, I kept asking myself one question: how could a father abandon his own daughter when she needed him the most? That question haunted me for years. I spent my first night at a crowded shelter where the beds were full, forcing me to sleep in a plastic chair. Every sound made me jump. Every hour felt longer than the last. I didn't cry because I was scared. I cried because I knew my daughter deserved better. The next morning, I promised her something I wasn't even sure I could keep. "I don't know how," I whispered while holding my stomach, "but I'm going to build a life you'll be proud of." Those words became my reason to keep going. I found a part-time job cleaning offices during the day and folding laundry at a small motel in the evenings. Every dollar mattered. Some nights I skipped dinner just so I could save enough money to buy diapers before my baby was born. People looked at me with pity. Some judged me. Others ignored me completely. But every time I felt like giving up, my daughter would kick, reminding me that quitting wasn't an option anymore. Then one afternoon, while cleaning an office building, I met an elderly woman named Margaret. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. But she changed my life forever. Instead of treating me like an employee, she treated me like a person. She noticed my swollen feet, my tired eyes, and the fake smile I wore every day. "You look exhausted," she said gently. I smiled politely. "I'm fine." She shook her head. "No, sweetheart. You're surviving. There's a difference." No one had spoken to me with that much kindness in months. I broke down crying. I told her everything. About my pregnancy. About my father. About being thrown out with nowhere to go. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she quietly handed me a business card. "I own this building," she said. "Come see me tomorrow morning." I stared at the card, confused. "Why?" Margaret smiled. "Because I think you're stronger than you realize." I had no idea that accepting her invitation would completely change the course of my life. And I certainly had no idea that years later, the man who abandoned me would be the one desperately asking for a second chance. The next morning, I almost didn't go. I stood outside Margaret's office for nearly 10 minutes, staring at the elegant glass doors. People in expensive suits walked past me without a second glance. My shoes were worn out, my maternity shirt barely fit anymore, and I felt like I didn't belong there. But then I remembered my promise to my daughter. I took a deep breath and walked inside. Margaret greeted me with a warm smile, as if she'd been expecting me all along. "I was wondering if you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't." "I'm glad you changed your mind." Instead of offering me charity, she offered me something far more valuable, an opportunity. She needed someone to organize files, answer phones, and help with basic office work. The pay was better than my cleaning job. The hours were stable, and she even promised paid maternity leave after I gave birth. I couldn't believe it. "Why me?" I asked. Margaret leaned back in her chair. "Because skills can be taught. Character can't. Yesterday, I saw a woman who refused to give up even after losing everything. Those words stayed with me. A month later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. I named her Lily. The first time I held her, I realized something important. My father hadn't destroyed my future. He had simply removed himself from it. Life wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, overdue bills, and moments when I wondered if I was strong enough to keep going. But every challenge taught me something new. Margaret became more than my boss. She became the mentor I'd never had. She encouraged me to take business classes in the evenings. She taught me how to negotiate, how to lead meetings, and how to believe in myself. One day, she'd often say, "People won't remember where you started. They'll remember where you finished." Years passed. The shy pregnant girl who once cleaned Office floor slowly became the company's operations manager, then senior manager, then director. Every promotion came with more responsibility and more confidence. One afternoon, Margaret called me into her office. She looked older than I remembered. "I've been thinking about retirement," she said. I smiled. "You've earned it." She nodded. "I have." Then she slid a folder across the desk. Inside were documents I couldn't understand at first. "What is this?" "My succession plan." I looked at her in confusion. "I want you to take over." I nearly laughed. "Me?" "You. I don't own this company." "Not yet." I stared at her, speechless. Over the next year, Margaret slowly transferred ownership through a carefully planned agreement. She said she trusted me more than anyone she'd ever worked with. The business continued to grow. We opened new offices, hired hundreds of employees, expanded into different cities. Everything I'd once thought impossible became reality. Meanwhile, I never heard from my father. Not on my birthday. Not when Lily started school. Not even when my picture appeared in local business magazines. It was as if I had never existed. At first that hurt. Eventually, it became peaceful. Lily often asked why she didn't have a grandfather. I never filled her heart with anger. I simply told her, sometimes people make choices they spend the rest of their lives regretting. She would nod, accepting the answer without fully understanding it. I hoped she never would. Then, one quiet Monday morning, my assistant knocked on my office door. "There's someone here asking to see you." "Do they have an appointment?" "No." "Then ask them to schedule one." She hesitated. "He says, he's your father." For a moment, time stood still. The room suddenly felt smaller. The memories I had buried for years came rushing back. The rain, the slammed door, the shelter, the lonely nights, and the promise I'd made to Lily. I slowly stood up from my chair. After all these years, why was he here now? And why did I have the feeling that this visit had nothing to do with love? And everything to do with desperation? For a long moment, I couldn't move. The words, "He's your father," echoed in my mind as if they belonged to someone else's life. I had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways over the years. Sometimes I pictured him apologizing. Other times I imagined walking away without saying a word. But now that it was real, I felt nothing. No anger, no excitement, just silence. "Send him in," I finally said. A few seconds later, the office door slowly opened. The man who walked in barely resembled the father I remembered. His shoulders were bent. His hair, once dark and neatly combed, had turned almost completely gray. Deep wrinkles lined his face, and his expensive confidence had been replaced with uncertainty. He looked around my office, clearly surprised by what he saw. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the awards on the wall, the company logo behind my desk. Then his eyes met mine. "Emma," he whispered. I nodded politely. "Please, have a seat." He sat down carefully, avoiding eye contact. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been following your success." I almost smiled. "No, you haven't." He looked embarrassed. I heard about you recently." "Recently?" He lowered his head. "A few months ago." I folded my hands on the desk. "So after ignoring me for nearly 10 years, you suddenly remembered you had a daughter." He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the family photo on my desk. Lily was smiling brightly beside me, wearing her graduation gown from middle school. "Is that my granddaughter?" he asked softly. I looked at the picture. "Yes, she's beautiful." "She is." Another uncomfortable silence filled the room. Then he finally said the words I'd waited years to hear. "I'm sorry." Just 2 words. Words I once dreamed would heal everything. Instead, they felt strangely empty. "I'm sorry for throwing you out. I'm sorry for judging you. I'm sorry for choosing my pride over my family." His voice trembled as tears filled his eyes. "I thought I was teaching you responsibility." I looked at him calmly. "You weren't. You were teaching me what abandonment feels like." He closed his eyes. "I know." "No," I replied quietly. "You know the story. I lived it." I told him about sleeping in a shelter, about skipping meals during pregnancy, about crying myself to sleep because I didn't know how I'd buy diapers, about Lily's first birthday, her first steps, her first day at school. You missed all of it. Every sentence made him look smaller. When I finished speaking, he wiped his eyes. "I can never undo what I did." "No, you can't." Then he reached into his old leather bag and placed a stack of medical papers on my desk. My heart sank. "I've been diagnosed with kidney failure," he said. "The doctors say I need treatment immediately." I stayed silent. "My insurance won't cover everything." He swallowed hard. "I've already sold my house. My savings are gone. I don't have anyone left." Finally, he looked directly into my eyes. "I'm asking for your help." The room became completely quiet. It wasn't just an apology. It was a request. The man who once told me to face the consequences of my choices was now asking me to save him from his. I stood and walked toward the window, looking out over the city I had worked so hard to conquer. Years ago, I had stood in the rain with nowhere to go. Today, I owned the building where we were standing. Life had changed in ways neither of us could have imagined. Behind me, I heard my father quietly say, "I know I don't deserve your kindness." "You're right," I answered. "You don't." His head dropped. "But this isn't about what you deserve." I turned around slowly. "It's about the kind of person I've chosen to become." His eyes filled with hope. But before I made my decision, there was one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. My daughter, Lily. Because whatever happened next wouldn't just define my father's future. It would define the legacy I wanted to leave for my own child. That evening, I sat across from Lily at our kitchen table. She was 16 now, kind, thoughtful, and far wiser than I had been at her age. She noticed the expression on my face before I said a single word. "Mom?" she asked gently. "What happened today?" I took a slow breath. "Someone came to see me." "Who?" I looked down at my coffee cup before answering. "Your grandfather." She froze. "The one you've never talked about?" I nodded. "He wants my help." I told her everything. I told her about the kidney failure, the apology, and the years of silence that had brought him to my office. When I finished, Lily didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she asked the one question I had been avoiding all day. "Do you forgive him?" I stared out the window. "I honestly don't know." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You always taught me that forgiveness isn't pretending someone didn't hurt you." I smiled. "That's true. It's choosing not to let that hurt control your future." Her words reminded me so much of Margaret that I almost laughed through my tears. The next morning, I called my father. "I'll help pay for your treatment," I said. Before he could interrupt, I continued. "But understand this. I'm not doing it because you earned it. I'm doing it because I refuse to become the kind of person who lets bitterness make my decisions." On the other end of the line, I heard him crying. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't expect you to call me Dad. You haven't earned that title yet," I replied honestly. Over the following months, my company covered the medical expenses that he couldn't afford. His health slowly improved, but I kept clear boundaries. There were no family vacations. No pretending the past had never happened. Trust isn't rebuilt with words. It's rebuilt with time. Sometimes he would write letters apologizing for specific moments. He remembered. My high school graduation. He never attended. The birthday cards he never sent. And the countless days he chose his pride over his daughter. For the first time in his life, he accepted responsibility without making excuses. One Sunday afternoon, I invited him to a small family dinner. He was nervous. Lily walked over and smiled politely. "Hi." His eyes filled with tears. "Hi, Lily." He expected her to reject him. Instead, she simply said, "Mom says people should be judged by what they do next, not only by what they did before." He looked at me, speechless. That sentence wasn't just for him. It was for all of us. Months turned into years. We never became the perfect family. Some wounds leave scars that never completely disappear. But little by little, we built something new. Not by erasing the past, but by facing it honestly. One afternoon, my father asked me a question I'd never expected. "Why did you help me after everything I did?" I smiled softly. "Because when you closed that door on me years ago, I promised my daughter she would grow up seeing strength instead of hatred. I kept that promise." He lowered his head, tears running down his face. "I lost my daughter because of my pride." I gently corrected him. "You almost did." Years earlier, he had believed a pregnant young woman was a burden. He never imagined she would become a successful business owner, a loving mother, and the very person who would save his life. Life has a remarkable way of turning today's pain into tomorrow's strength. My father thought abandoning me was the end of my story. In reality, it was the beginning. And if there's one lesson my journey taught me, it's this. The people who walk away from you don't decide your future. You do.